This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Dude, it gets so much more fun each week. Like, this podcast gets significantly more fun with each week we do, I think. All right, the practice squad presents the Throwback, and we're getting into it now. It's going to be games 9 and 10, which is weeks 10 and 11, because we just had the bye week. The Lions come out of the bye week in 2011, sitting at 6-2, and they drop it a game 37-13 at Chicago. They do rebound on the road the following week, 49-35 over the Panthers, and we'll get into both of those games here today. And Stroz, we talked about it a little last time. I think the deeper we get, the more it's like there's the more we have to say. When we did the podcast originally, it would have been episode 3, talking about the Lions win over the Bears at home, a very memorable win on Monday Night Football to push them to 5-0. It felt like they would have lost this game at a neutral field, and boy, they just got blitzed with a 37-13 loss to Chicago.
For coming off of a bye week, this team looked like it was nowhere to be found. It looked like it was lost from the initial snap. Things started off really, really rough for this team too, and they never really got going. I think arguably Matt Stafford had probably his worst game of the season. I think offensively this team just couldn't get out of the blocks and couldn't get any momentum going. Defensively, it was like a hot knife through butter. These guys couldn't stop anything. Like Jay Cutler looked like an efficient quarterback for the first half. It was insane watching him cut them up.
So, I've not done this yet. I take notes on every game. They're very different game to game. Some of them are very long, some of them are very short. But this is not something I've done yet. I wrote down their first 3 offensive and defensive possessions, pretty much what happened. Because they were undisciplined right off the bat. Fumble on the opening drive, gives the Chicago the ball in good position, and then an unnecessary roughness on the defensive possession. So you've given them the ball in a good spot, and then given them a free 15 yards on the penalty. Second possession, guess what? Another fumble. And then what happens on defense? By the way, they already have the ball at this point at like the 45-yard line. A face mask, which was on a third down to extend the drive. More points. Key drop on third down, or on third drive that could have extended the drive. And then a massive punt return follows. And actually the fourth drive is a 3-and-out followed by a punt return touchdown. The Lions were trailing this one 20-0. And there's a theme this season, no doubt, of slow starts. This wasn't a slow start. They got absolutely blitzed. They were down 20-0, 45 seconds into the second quarter of this game. I mean, this is coming off of a bye week. They just weren't ready to play. And I'll fight you a little bit on Stafford's game. I think statistically, looking at the box score, it was one of the worst games he had. I texted you. I was excited for this one because I thought we might have watched a different game. I thought Matthew Stafford looked significantly better than the numbers. I don't think he looked great. He had some bad throws. We'll get into that a little bit later. Defensively, I thought what was really interesting, we've seen this team do a really good job responding in-game, making in-game adjustments. But one thing I noticed very early on, remember, Matt Forte killed them in the first meeting. And you could tell that whether it was coached or it was just, and my guess would be it was coached, or whether it was just a natural reaction, the linebackers were so focused on the running game and the short passing game. Jay Cutler only threw 19 passes, only completed 9 of them. But it felt like Jay Cutler threw for 400 yards. Because everything was moving down the ball, or down the field deep. It was all wide open. Jay Cutler didn't really have to make difficult throws. Only sacked him twice in this one after being all over him in the previous game against them. I thought what had happened is the defense, we've seen it before, when they fully commit to stopping the run or the pass, they do a really good job. Problem is, that leaves you susceptible to the other. The secondary had some strengths, but they were routinely getting beat in the same spot. It was deep behind the linebackers, but before the safeties were there.
Exactly.
And I thought it was because they were so damn insistent at stopping Forte. And they did. But the problem was Jay Cutler tore you apart. He only threw for 130 yards. Mm-hmm. That's actually incredible. Like when you watch this game to see that he only threw for only 123 total. But the thing about Jay Cutler's day was he was so efficient in the first and second quarter. He didn't have to do a whole lot in the third and fourth, and really and truly, he didn't do a whole lot in the third and fourth. But the first and second quarter, he allowed this team to get out to such a massive lead that when it came time for the third and fourth quarter, it was just hand off to Forte, hand off to Forte, hand off to Forte. You look at the total yards in this game, the Lions outgained him 393 to 216. The
but you have to
problem
remember,
was the Bears
Chicago
were
was
routinely
taking advantage of, field position. Chicago was taking it.
It was turnovers. The Lions had 6.
Yeah.
It was punt returns. They had a touchdown plus a couple other big ones. It was just, this was a Lions team that didn't show up to play for this game.
Chicago operated on such a short field this entire game. Whether it was Devin Hester moving the ball down the field to set them up in good field position, or it was the Lions self-destructing and turning the ball over on their own side of the 50. Every time you looked around, it was like Chicago got the ball and was 1 or 2 plays away from getting into the red zone and then just taking advantage. It was insane to watch this game unfold. I was so frustrated watching it. And it made no sense to me at the time, and it still doesn't make any sense to me, because this team came off a bye week, and this was a team that was going into this game, I believe they were 6-2. There was a team that it was
an important game, by the way, because they were 6-2, the Bears were 5-3. You're both fighting for a wild card spot. If you beat them, you've now beaten them twice. Like, this is a huge game.
This was a huge game, yeah. And everybody was looking up at Green Bay, and it was like trying to catch Green Bay to win the division. And they just flat out didn't show up this game. They just did not show up this game. And that was the biggest issue.
You had 2 defensive touchdowns by the Bears. I believe they were both off of interception returns. You had a punt return touchdown by Devin Hester. And then you had 2 fumbles that both gave the ball to Chicago inside the 50-yard line.
And they put 10 points up from there.
37-13 is almost a blessing. They probably should have lost this game worse than this. This was an incredibly poor performance. Now, I do want to go to Stafford. Much like I tracked the first 3 possessions, I also tracked all 4 Stafford interceptions. The first interception was clearly a miscommunication. That doesn't mean it's not Stafford's fault. I'm not saying that. You don't really know. But whenever a receiver turns over the outside shoulder, ball's on the inside or vice versa, somebody thought the route was being run different. It's not to say it's not his fault, but those are different. Second interception was terrible. That one was returned for a touchdown. Third interception was one of the most frustrating interceptions I've ever watched. And so bad, I had to look because I had no idea who the receiver was. Did you know that Rasheed Davis was a wide receiver for the Lions this season?
Yeah.
He played corner.
Not until this play.
Yeah, he played corner. Actually he's listed as a corner, on Pro Football Reference, but he was a wide receiver at parts of his career as well. 5 targets, 4 receptions. The only one he missed was the third interception, and it was incredible because he had the inside on a slant route. And if you have the inside in a slant route, and the ball's put in the right spot, an interception should literally never happen. Maybe you drop it. But an interception, the ball literally went right through where it needs to go for a wide receiver to catch it into the corner's hands. It was like, the fact that Stafford gets dinged for that interception was incredible. And the 4th and final interception, also not a great one, but I thought it was a product of Stafford's understandable reliance on the Calvin jump ball. It was a key situation. He didn't have anything else, so he just threw it up to Calvin. It wasn't there. Calvin got beat to it. Aside from that, he threw the ball 63 times. He was under constant pressure. I didn't think he was good in this one, but I also don't think that he was really given much of an opportunity to have a great game, especially like the young, immature Matthew Stafford.
So funny, because watching this game unfold, I was like, I wonder how B's gonna spin this and protect Matt Stafford through this.
No, that's garbage. That's garbage.
Garbage is right. Matt Stafford played like garbage in this game. He was horrible, man.
Stafford
he completed like 53% of his passes. You're right. He was under distress all day.
5 of them.
He was under distress all day long. You're absolutely right. He accounts for 4 interceptions. He did nothing to put this team in a spot to win at all in any of this game.
I don't even want to fight about 2011 games, but you looking at this like, how am I going to protect him is garbage, because he's been my number 1 dud. I have not given anybody the dud label more than Stafford. And I don't think he was great in this one, but he was under pressure, asked to throw the ball 65 times against a defense that, by the way, knew he was throwing the ball because the Lions were back from the very beginning of this game. In fact, they ran the ball 19 times. I wouldn't be surprised if 10 of those came in the late 4th quarter when they were just admitting that this game was over. He had at least the 1 interception he had absolutely no business being blamed for. You want to call it 3, fine. I think both the miscommunication and the jump ball are a little bit different. Also, there were so many drops in this game. Calvin had a bad drop. Calvin had a drop on a 3rd down that led to the first field goal the Lions got in the 2nd quarter. At the time, I believe they were down. It might have only been 10.
10-0. Yeah.
But Calvin had a catch that looked like, I honestly wondered if it was going to be called a fumble. Like, he had borderline tucked the ball. And this was going toward, like, he would have been at the 2-yard line. He dropped one. Pettigrew had some drops. I think there might have been 7 or 8 drops in this game. And so if you want to talk about completion percentage, he wasn't great, but he should have been closer to 40 of 63.
Will you not concede, though, in this game, he threw receivers into dangerous spots. There were times where Calvin Johnson was almost running blind. It was like on a slant pattern, I think 2 or 3 different times where he's getting ready to cross the middle. Stafford's throwing it, and he's throwing into double and triple coverage as Johnson is running his route. And like, there's no reason this ball should be coming to Calvin. They're obviously all over him. And you just basically put him in a bad spot. Calvin, I think, took a shot in this game. I could be mixing it up with the other game, but Calvin takes a shot in one of these games.
Yeah, no, I don't think Stafford was good in this game. But I think this falls much more towards the middle of the pack in what we've seen this season. And the 4 interceptions are the only reason it doesn't feel like that. Yeah, I know, at times he was putting wide receivers in bad spots. And on the flip side, at times, by the way, I don't think many of those were caught. I think there were very few plays where he was bailed out in this one, which is something, to be fair, has happened to him up until this point. Calvin's bailed him out. I do not think that really happened in this game. And I think there were also many throws he made that at a bare minimum, I think there were at least 5 easy drops in this one. I just don't think Matthew Stafford was the biggest problem in this game. I think 2 fumbles right off the bat. I don't know who was credited with those. I think one of them might have been Calvin.
Burleson had 1 and Williamson had 1.
Are you sure it was Williamson? Because it doesn't have it on my game, but I actually think Calvin was the first fumble of the game.
Oh no, it was Calvin. Yeah, you're right. It was Calvin and it was Burleson. You're absolutely right.
So like, again, like right off the bat, this team just wasn't there. Nobody was showing up. I didn't think Stafford was good, but I thought that at the very worst, he was as bad as anybody else. Like, I put it this way. I'm not going to tell you who my dud is right now, but I absolutely could not have considered Matthew Stafford my dud. I don't think he was given nothing. Absolutely nothing in this game. You asked, said was essentially a rookie quarterback. You asked him to throw the ball 65 times against a good defense on the road, under pressure, and you couldn't even catch open passes on a routine basis. And when you did, sometimes you fumbled them twice in the first 2 possessions. It was unacceptable play around Matthew Stafford.
I don't think the coaching staff did a good job to protect him or to help him out in this game. This was a game where when you watch it, you're like, okay, cool. So this is kind of watching these games and kind of piecing how Lions history goes for Lions fans. You start to see where you get, which Matthew Stafford are we going to get today? Is he going to be hot Matt Stafford or is he going to be cold Matt Stafford? This was a game where if you ask me, he was ice cold. But the coaching staff, you're right, did not do a good enough job of protecting him or helping him to succeed in this game. That being said, the receiving corps did not do a good job. There was zero rush in this game. You're right, they ran the ball 19 times. The one thing I took out of this, and then when I juxtapose it to what I got in the following game that we're going to discuss, Kevin Smith touched the ball 4 times. Kevin Smith in those 4 touches looked like the most reliable back that you had in this game.
This is just my own memory of the situation. Kevin Smith was signed. He might have been signed in before this game. He was signed very recently.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Stafford being ice cold, if you want to use a temperature, I'd say somewhere between room temperature and a little chilly. Like, it wasn't a good game. It was. I would call it a bad game. I think it's probably the 4th worst game he's had. It's hard for me to even go anywhere else. Like, I thought the wide receivers were atrocious. I think it was the worst performance we've seen out of the receiving corps, period. I also think it's notable. This is a trend that I think is really interesting. After I called out Brandon Pettigrew a couple weeks ago, having a massive drop, I believe it was it wasn't in the end zone. It was on a 4th and 10, against Atlanta. He had a massive drop, and I said that was a play that, felt like it would be a part of the definition of his career. Brandon Pettigrew, overwhelmingly a big part of the offense early on. 5 receptions, 38 yards. He was below Nate Burleson, Calvin Johnson, and Titus Young, all in receptions. That is one positive note. One positive note I want to bring up. We questioned when Jahvid Best went down if that was when Nate Burleson stepped up, because he was quiet early on in the season, which I didn't remember. I think that this game was the arrival of Nate Burleson. This is the first time that we really start to see him become the number 2 receiver on this team. And Titus Young, by the way, good game as far as receptions and yards as well.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. Nate Burleson, this was the game where you start to see him being utilized a little bit more in this offense, where they start putting in different packages for him to get the ball specifically. And legitimately, he is probably their most reliable weapon on offense in this game. If you look at what Calvin Johnson did, Calvin Johnson was targeted 19 times in this game, only caught 7 balls. Some of those are his fault, some of those are Matt Stafford's fault. We've already kind of gone through that.
I agree with that.
Brandon Pettigrew, another one, caught 5 passes off of 9 different targets. Again, a lot of the drops. Tony Scheffler, this was a guy who I put up last week in our podcast. I said, hey, this guy is fantastic. And then a week later, comes around and he has 3 catches on 7 targets. So like nobody was doing a very good job catching the football. But Nate Burleson, 8 of 9, and he legitimately was their most significant offensive weapon this entire game.
Honestly, I don't have a whole lot of other notes. I was absolutely, I've not needed to vent after a rewatch until this one.
You know, I thought the one thing I thought that really hurt Matt Stafford in his performance, that O-line was brutal. They were like, I can't.
Well, and he threw it 65 times.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. That doesn't help. But that O-line was so damn bad. Cause you're right. He was under distress all game long. Every time you turned around, there was 1, 2, sometimes 3 guys chasing Matt Stafford. I went back and I watched do you remember the Alex Smith injury, when he was Washington's quarterback, the one that's basically ended his career? They're doing like an E60 on it. And his leg looks like hamburger meat. It is disgusting. I went back and I watched that play again where it was Washington versus Houston, I think 2018. And that was Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford was Alex Smith. Drops back the pass, and next thing you know, you got a guy rushing you from the right side. He turns around to spin to get away, and there's a guy right there on the left side, and it just collapsed and swallows him up. The fact that Matt Stafford made it out of this game alive after being put in a position where he had to throw the ball as much as he did, and the offensive line was as porous as they were, is amazing. All that being said, does not absolve his sins. He was absolute trash in this game.
Yeah, I don't think that it's fair to go that far. He was underwhelming. He underperformed, but I think what he did was about as good as you were going to get out of that version of Matthew Stafford. You want to move on to duds and studs?
Yes. Who's your stud?
So my stud was Nate Burleson. It was hard. I'm not really happy with anyone in this game. I just gave the stud to somebody who lost an early fumble. I think he was the second one. You can't be doing that after you just fumbled on the first offensive possession, gave up 7 points. But he finally became an impact part of the offense, and I think that continues moving forward. This game was bad. This is like, if I wasn't gonna give it to Nate Burleson, I don't even know who number 2 would be. Did you go any other route?
I struggled with the same thing. Like, who do you give it to? I have no idea who you can give it to in this game.
I don't know who number 2 is. If you're not giving it to Nate Burleson, I'm really curious who you're giving it to.
Because everybody played such a piss poor game. I gave it to Nate Burleson as well. He accounted for 93 yards of their total offense.
Yeah, he did have a 10-yard run in there as well.
So, again, he was their most reliable receiver. He did a little bit on the ground as well. And you're right. He was their second fumble. Like, that's how bad this game was. The guy who gets the nod for being the best player fumbled the ball and put this team in a spot.
And maybe this is my point, Stroz. The next 2 names who come to mind. No, I said he had a bad overall game. The next 2 names that come to mind are Titus Young and Matt Stafford. And I think Matt Stafford had a bad game. I do. I genuinely do. But who are you giving it to on defense either?
Oh yeah, there was nobody on defense. Like everybody on defense was basically a pylon.
Stafford is in the stud discussion, and I think it is far and away Nate Burleson. But like, to me, that speaks to how bad the supporting cast was in this one. That he could even be in the discussion.
This was one of those games where, as a Lions fan, as a Lions player, you just want to erase it from your memory. It was so damn bad.
At this
Who's
point,
your dud?
I was 9 games into a rewatch, and I was mad and I still needed to vent. My dud, I'm going to give it to a collection of players here, and that's the Lions special teams. And oh my God, was it bad. Devin Hester had 3 punt returns for an average of 40 yards. And he did have an 80-yarder, but like, he was still making it happen in the other punts as well. He did have a touchdown. He continually flipped field position. And on the other side, by the way, Stephon Logan had 2 returns for 44 yards. But I want to remind you that the 22 yards average that Stephon Logan's getting credit for, that includes the yards in the end zone. So a 22-yard return from 9 yards deep in the end zone gets you to the 13-yard line. I know that both of those kicks had them behind, like, either behind the 20 or one of them might have gotten them just past the 20. And in the punt game, he had 3 returns for 2 yards, and he had a fumble that he ended up recovering himself. but I just thought that they were brutal on both sides of special teams.
Nope, you're spot on. The special teams was absolutely abysmal. I think you have a feeling of who my dud is, and it's Matt Stafford. Again, 4 interceptions, completed roughly 52% of his passes. He almost got his wide receiving core killed. Like I said before, his offensive line did him no favors, right? But you're the franchise quarterback. I expect a little bit more. I understand that we are both looking at him with a bit of a rookie lens because this is his first full season where he gets to go out there and actually do things and he's not hurt. All that being said, he played an absolutely awful game in this game. I don't think he helped this team out at all. I don't think anybody else helped him out, but he for sure did not help anybody out in this game.
All right, moving on. The Lions rebound with a win against the Panthers 49-35, and this one started rough.
Bro, it started so messy. In my notes, this is what I have. This game starts so messy and so disjointed.
Well, and you know,
Stafford with 2 interceptions. You got Cam with an interception.
Was it the first 2 possessions for Stafford?
Yes. Yeah. It was like he picked up right where he left off with Chicago.
And that was the problem. He started so poor.
Keelan Williamson had a fumble in this game. It was absolutely brutal. Brutal from both sides.
My first note to counter that. I thought Stafford, both of his interceptions were absolutely terrible. And I didn't remember this game. There were things about this game that came back to my memory as I watched it, but I did not remember this game at all, originally. And as I saw those first 2 interceptions, I really wondered what kind of game this was going to be, because we've seen a lot of different versions of Stafford even just in this season. I don't know what you think, Stroz. I think after those 2 interceptions, he rebounded to play absolutely freaking incredible. Like, I think if you could wipe those, and you can't, but if you could wipe those 2 interceptions from the game, I think this was the best game of his career to this point. He finished the game with only 8 total incompletions, 5 touchdowns, 335 yards, and throw the stats out, like eyeball test. What he struggled with all game long, and he had some misses in the previous game to the Bears, is the deep ball. He was routinely hitting the deep ball in this one. He hit a perfect breadbasket throw to Calvin. He hit one of the Titus Young that ended up coming back on an offensive pass interference, but right where it needed to be. I mean, this was the kind of game where, even if you looked at Stafford after the Chicago game, the way that you did, Stroz, this is a game where you go, holy crap, like, this guy has the ability to be special. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you're allowed to throw 2 interceptions if you throw 5 touchdowns and only 8 incompletions on 36 attempts.
I mean,
you wish it wouldn't be back to back, but.
Right. If you minus those 2 interceptions, right, he had 6 incomplete passes. This was his most complete game to this point in the season. This was like, who is this guy and where was he last week? How could you not get him last week? But he showed up in this game and he played arguably his best game of the season, and he looked awesome after those 2 interceptions.
That 5th touchdown in particular, I believe off the top of my head it was to Brandon Pettigrew. He split them all around. Scheffler had one, Titus Young had one, Brandon Pettigrew, Kevin Smith, and Nate Burleson. But the touchdown to take the lead, I want to say around
like 2:32.
Was it that late? Because Kevin Smith scored one after the fact.
Yes, it was. So what ends up happening is they get the ball. Game's tied. Stafford marches down the field and throws a bullet to Brandon Pettigrew.
That was such a beauty. And like, he struggled, in the red zone, I feel like he might not have turned it over, but he struggled getting the ball in the end zone when they got close, throwing the ball. And it was an incredible throw, and so much praise for Stafford in this one. But what came back to my memory from this game was that this was the Kevin Smith game.
Yep. Absolutely. Watching this game, I have in my notes, Kevin Smith, basically I had like the first quarter of this game because I was just kind of blown away. Through the first quarter of this game and the end of the Chicago game, Kevin Smith seems like your most capable back, and he just goes off in this entire game. Well, this was the Kevin Smith game.
Noting early on, he was kind of splitting the work with Maurice Morris, but they really did start to lean on Kevin Smith late. 16 carries for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. He broke multiple big runs. He also had a touchdown in the receiving game and 60 yards. I think this game is probably one of the more complete games the Lions have played since 2011 offensively. And honestly, you could even say defensively. They gave up 35 points, but one was an interception return for a touchdown. And I believe the special teams was brutal in this one as well. Yeah, they had a kick return touchdown in this one as well. So you could take 14 points away from the defense. They didn't even step on the field. But offensively, Stafford, incredible. Kevin Smith, 140 yards, incredible.
Speaking of special teams, this is their third punter in 3 weeks.
Yeah, they mentioned
like that's how bad their special teams was.
Titus Young, funny enough, only 2 receptions for 14 yards and a touchdown. He did have a big play taken away. But after seeing him do well in the Bears game and then just watching him work in this game, I did write it down. Titus Young was going to be special. I don't have a doubt about it. I think Titus Young could have been, maybe this is a little bit too high of praise. Titus Young could have been Tyreek Hill. I think he could have been in that ballpark. He had breakaway speed. After he caught the ball, he was as hard to tackle as anybody. Obviously the mental part of it was the problem. But this guy was going to be a number 1 level receiver. He was never going to pass Calvin, obviously, but he was going to be a 1B, a guy who on most rosters would have been a number 1. I really don't have any doubts about that in my mind at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the comparison to Tyreek Hill might be a little bit much, but you can see the makings of a guy who looks like he's going to be extremely special. And the fact that he plays in a role where he's only second to Calvin Johnson, who's going to take most of the coverage anyways, puts him in a prime spot to be extremely effective. And if he could have just kept his head on straight.
Here's what I'll tell you. 2011 was his rookie year. So we're watching his rookie season.
Mm-hmm.
And playing behind Calvin, playing behind Nate Burleson, playing on an offense that for 6 weeks, Jahvid Best might have been the number 2 receiver. An offense that utilizes his tight ends heavily. Titus Young, as a rookie, managed 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. I mean, those aren't special numbers, but this wasn't a guy who was put in a position to put up yards in year 1. And he did. And he put up, this wasn't even necessarily the game for it. It was maybe a little bit more of a reaction to the Bears game. But you know where I put it was actually on the play he got an offensive pass interference. I mean, I guess maybe that's not fair because he had to shove to get open, but it was just the speed and how quickly he got so deep down the field. I don't know, man.
Watching that specific play, once I seen the flag come on, I was like, okay, cool. So we got defensive pass interference, and they called offensive because like watching it unfold, at that exact moment, I was like, wow, you got something here with him. And then it goes the other way and it goes against him for offensive pass interference. And I was like, well, maybe we got to pump the brakes a little bit. But no, you're absolutely right. Watching him burn up that sideline and then create the space, get open and catch the ball. Yeah, there was a little bit of pass interference there. But if you go back and you watch that play, legitimately, I think it could have went either way. I really do think it could have went either way. And they called him for offensive pass interference. But there was a play, and I don't know if it was in the Chicago game or if it was in this game against the Panthers. He catches the ball. It looks like it's a screen pass. Catches the ball. There is traffic in front of him. He basically does a jump cut, and then he just gets upfield. That had to have been in the Chicago game because he didn't have a lot of yards in this game. But taking something that was essentially nothing and then turning it into a play that really helped out the team, I was like, this guy has it. This guy looks like he's going to be special. And then the wheels all fell off. Next thing you know, he's basically a homeless guy and
I think he's more
in a mattress store.
I think he's more disappointing, as a team that drafted Roy Williams, Charles Rogers, Mike Williams, any other disappointing wide receivers I'm missing in the early rounds.
No.
But as a team who took those 3, I think Titus Young is a bigger what if, is a more disappointing story, because I really think he was going to be something.
Okay, so we're now 10 games into the season, okay? And I think you're starting to see how these wheels kind of fall off, right? So you lose Jahvid Best, who is a key part of this offense. You've got Titus Young, who is looking like he's going to be an integral star on this offense. And you know what happens with him. It's just at what point do the wheels just fall off for Titus Young? Because you've already lost Jahvid Best for the rest of his career. We know this now, but then we did not know that. We know that now. Looking, trying to project everything. You know what's going to happen with Titus Young. It's just when does it all happen? So looking at how everything, it feels almost like this was a house of cards and a strong wind comes through and blew it all over.
Watching this game, I did have a moment where I thought, if Jahvid Best stays healthy, this team might be as good as the 2014 team.
Mm-hmm.
Their defense wasn't as good. And here's the thing that you need to point out. If Jahvid Best stays healthy, maybe Nate Burleson never finds his groove, so maybe it's not totally fair. Let's put it, how about this? Not if Jahvid Best stays healthy, but if Jahvid Best comes back And Nate Burleson's now found his groove. You can still have the Jahvid best part of your game. They weren't as good defensively. And as we go game after game, you see more cracks in the defense. This one overall, I thought they were pretty good. The defense only gave up 21. They had 4 interceptions as well. I believe they caused a fumble, but I don't think they recovered it. Man, watching this offense in retrospect, because it's really hard, like in the moment, you can watch a team and be like, wow, this is going to be special based off of potential. We're no longer basing this off of potential. Like watching this game versus Carolina, and to be fair, Carolina was 2-8 this year, so they were not a good football team. But watching this game, I think this offense really was so close. And a mature Matthew Stafford would have gone a long way too. But this offense was so close. And you're right. If Jahvid Best and Titus Young don't both completely leave, who knows what would have happened with this offense. You lost some key pieces. And then Nate Burleson breaks his hand either the next year or 2 years down the road, trying to save his pizza. Like this team was actually, I think this team might have been better than I remember it. Or maybe not in 2011 better, but the template for the team going forward was better than I remember.
I think that's what you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
It has the potential because you see it has all these pieces and they were just trying to they were like baby deer at this point, trying to get their footing and just trying to learn to run at this point. And I think what you kind of get is if everything kind of worked out the way it was supposed to and guys didn't get hurt and guys' careers didn't come to an end, 2012 would have been a really special year. And
I do think it was fragile because the defense was very undisciplined and that was a routine problem. And that's why it fell apart the way it did. And it's going to be really hard for me to stop tracking this team, when this podcast is done because I want to see and like really understand what happened. But I do think that's what happened is you lost these weapons, but the defense, it just wasn't disciplined enough to be what carried you. Like they were good enough to support an offense that it looked like you were starting to put together, but they were not good enough to carry you.
No, you're spot on. This defense, so watching this game, right? I think this game sets up perfectly for this type of defense, right? And I think that's part of the reason why they were able to fall behind and then they were able to climb back in and then win this game. Because this was a team, if you remember those early, Carolina Panther teams, you had Cam Newton who could hardly throw a football. He wasn't very good. He had
such a short window in his career where he was a pretty good thrower.
No, you're accurate.
He had a window, but it was not long.
It was not long. But he was very good at running the football. You also had Jonathan Stewart, very good at running the football. D'Angelo Williams, very good at running the football.
It was funny to watch both of them because both were still in the league until somewhat recently. Mm-hmm. So it was weird watching them be so fast.
Yeah, it's true. It's like Frank Gore again, right? So this game sets up perfectly for this defense, right? You can be aggressive and you can stack the box and you can basically leave your cornerbacks and your safeties out there on their own little islands playing a zone coverage. You just play Tampa 2. Just cover 2 all day long in your secondary and you let the guys up front just run at Cam, run at the running backs because legitimately they only had one wide receiver who was worth a damn.
Watching this game, I wonder what this specific Panthers offense could have been in today's league. Because of course they worked in the college style option. Cam Newton ran the ball 7 times and had 2 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they did it enough. I think that there should have been more run pass options, which is relatively, new. In the NFL. We didn't see a ton of that until maybe the last 3 or 4 years. But yeah, Cam Newton was, at this point in his career, we talk about where Calvin was athletically. At this point in his career, Cam Newton was just a freak. Probably one of the 5 or 6 most athletic offensive players on the field, period. And they had so much speed in D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. They could have used more of them both on the field. By the way, Steve Smith Senior, I don't know how old he was at this point in his career, but he definitely had some speed still too. This offense feels like if they would have been more early adapters of this, what we see in Kansas City with the run pass option, what we see in Baltimore, letting Lamar run the ball. If we would have seen more of that in Carolina, I think this offense could have actually been really damn good.
Steve Smith is 32,
so
31, 32-ish at this point in his career.
Still a speed demon at 31, 32.
Yeah, he's still able to get it done. I enjoyed watching Steve Smith play in this game.
Yeah, no, it was fun to watch him. He's the first wide receiver who was like, man, I miss watching this guy play like this.
No, you're absolutely right. Again, this was a game where I felt like it was tailor-made for the Detroit Lions to win this game. And you're right, Carolina was not a good team at this point in their career, or at this point in the season. And Cam Newton was not a very good quarterback at this point in his career. But it was such a run-heavy offense where it plays to that defense being so aggressive and in your face, which kind of segues to my dud, if you don't mind.
Before we do that, no, we'll do that in just a second. I want to say one thing. It's incredible that the score of this game was 49-35, and there were a combined 55 running plays. No. Usually, when you move the ball that much on the ground, scores are lower. There's a lot of offensive plays in this game.
It was a ton. But again, back to the duds. For me in this game, you brought it up earlier. It's the front seven, and it's them committing 4 of the 6 defensive penalties in this game. And it's been a theme since day one. You had guys committing horse collar tackles left and right. You had illegal usage of hands in this game.
They did get a horse tackle, and I'm pretty sure it was all hair, by the way.
Was it against
Angelo Williams, I believe.
Yes, Angelo Williams. But like DeAndre Levy had 2 in this game where it just helped it just gave them an extra possession. Now, you give Cam Newton enough bullets, Cam Newton's going to shoot himself in the foot, and he shot himself in the foot at least 4 times in this game. So it was okay. It didn't really hurt in the long run. But when you go up against better talent, these things come back to bite you in the ass. They got lucky this game. So,
kind of opposite. I didn't think anyone was terrible in this game. But I gave it to all non-Kevin Smith running backs. Maurice Morris, 7 carries for 29 yards was meh. Keelan Williams had 1 carry for 0 yards and a fumble. I mean, we haven't really seen a running game. We're 10 games deep into the season now, and this is the first time we ever saw a running game, and it was the first time we ever saw Kevin Smith featured. And he also, I mean, that might not be fair. Jahvid Best, I think, had 1 good game on the ground. He had several good games in the passing game. But I just was underwhelmed with anything any of them did. But I thought all around it was a pretty strong game. They're really 49-35 is because Stafford had 2 bad passes early. And there was a kick return. You could probably give it to the special teams again, but it was only 1 return touchdown, and outside of that, they didn't do a ton. So I just went with all non-Kevin Smith running backs. I wonder who our studs are.
Yeah. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Well, I called it the Kevin Smith game. And yes, I don't know if you remember it that way, but so he had, I believe it was 2 really long runs in this game, 1 for a touchdown. He had a long reception for a touchdown, which was a screen pass. So he didn't even catch it down the field. He did all the work after the catch. And then he broke the final run to seal this game for a touchdown. This is probably a top 5 running back performance we've seen since then. I don't know that we have seen 5 games by a Detroit Lion running back that have been better since this game in 2011 by Kevin Smith.
This was one of those games where afterwards you start looking at your friends and you start looking at all the analysts and you're like, is he a viable fantasy option? Because this guy touched the ball 20 times in this game, accounted for 200 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. This was the Kevin Smith game. He was such a factor in every aspect of this game. It was nuts. And this was the most complete game that you've seen from a running back in such a long time. I can't remember the last time you've seen a running back do it, basically being able to catch out of the backfield, being able to run, being able to pass block. Kevin Smith did it all in this game. This was the quintessential Kevin Smith game. I'm trying to see. So no, this is, damn. I know I wrote an article about this game by Kevin Smith because I used to blog a lot back then, but I'm so far away. I went to one of my old blogs. I don't have it. I do remember after this game wondering, because this was not, Kevin Smith was out of the picture. They drafted Kevin Smith. He had a good year, disappeared. But this was with the return. I don't think he ended up being, let's put it this way. If I remember correctly, I think he takes over the starting role pretty clearly moving forward, but I also don't think he ever comes anywhere near doing this again. No, and I don't think he holds on to the starting role for very long either, okay, if I remember correctly. So, but he does. After this game, I believe is your number 1 option at running back. So it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of unfolds. We've got the Thanksgiving Day game coming up after this. Lions lose that one, and then we've got some foreshadowing with what takes place in the playoff game when they take on the Saints. So I'm not sure how long he holds on to that starting job. But in this role right now, he is your best running back at this point in the season.
And coming up next week, something we have not done yet. We're going to react to back-to-back losses. Back-to-back losses have happened, but we had the luck to split them between two podcasts. This is the first time we're in one episode we're going to react to two losses. And then we're going to have some fun after that. The deeper we get into this, I think the more we know about the 2011 team as a whole. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to next week. Thanks for listening. This is the Practice Squad presents Throwback.